Good evening, folks. This is the Factivist report for Sunday, February 26th. Tonight, we're going to talk about regulation and deregulation and everything in between. And we're going to start off right now. So here's Dave.
So, number one, Republicans use this deregulation thing as a hammer, and they use it effectively for a couple different reasons. Number one, do you like to be told what to do? I know I don't like to be told what to do. For the longest time, I fought back on the whole seatbelt thing. But in all honesty, when regulation is put out there, for the most part, it's about safety. So that's the first thing. But Republicans use it very well that Democrats are overstepping and they're trying to get into your lives and all that stuff. That's number one. Number two, Republicans push deregulation because deregulation is bad for business and bad for their donors. It cuts into the bottom line. And we're going to go into most of this presentation is going to be about the recent derailment, but there are going to be a couple other things that I'm going to talk about. I'm also going to talk about the different organizations, or like the EPA, the NTSB, and the DOT, and the fact that the Republicans are attacking them for not doing enough. However, they are the very people who, every time these entities try to do anything, the Republicans scream overreach every time.
Right.
So they criticize them for doing something, and then they criticize them for not doing enough once they rip away the regulations. There's also a big piece of this, which is when the Republicans fight for deregulation, they get money from these companies, specifically in this case, Norfolk Southern. And I'll get into that in a minute. So the first thing I want to say, and I'm gonna keep this from being screen shared just for a moment. The National Transportation Safety Board, their role in the derailment was to investigate and give their recommendations to Pete Buttigieg and the Department of Transportation. They are two separate entities. I want you to understand, they don't work for Pete Buttigieg. There are specific reasons why they don't. They're an independent agency. Okay?
And that's what they're supposed to be.
Yeah. So the NTSB chair, Jennifer Hamdi, told reporters that she's just tired. She wants this, the politics out of it. Her basic concern right now is the safety of the people who were involved in this, the people who live near it, the workers, all of that. So basically, the quote, she was asked about former President Donald Trump's recent visit to the crash site. She said, "I don't understand why this has gotten so political. This is a community that is suffering. This is not about politics." Unfortunately, it is about politics because it's about regulation versus deregulation. And we'll get into it, but I'm gonna screen share now. So basically what happened, this happened on February the 3rd, around, I believe it was 9 p.m., 9:30 p.m., around in there. There was a train that was carrying hazardous chemicals, and it derailed in East Palestine. It's Palestine, not Palestine, Ohio. And the first car to derail, which was the 23rd car, so it was in the middle of everything, it derailed because there was a wheel bearing that overheated and failed. And the train was unable, despite rail workers trying to get this thing to stop, it wouldn't stop. Okay, so here is a timeline. This is also from The Hill, Julia Shapiro. This was like 3 weeks after this happened, so they had a good idea. So, as I said, it happened. Actually, is there a better one? Yeah, there's a better one actually. So this is better because it even starts earlier than that. So February 3rd, the train derailed. Okay. 50 cars in East Palestine carrying a variety of freight. And this is Norfolk Southern is the company which we're going to be talking about. No injuries, however. Again, it was a chemical spill, and there was a potential explosion, and they had to dispel chemicals in the air. So February 5th, residents were ordered to evacuate. DeWine ordered them to evacuate. Okay. You need to leave. You just need to leave. This is a matter of life and death. This is important because DeWine later claims that he didn't call a state of emergency because he didn't know how serious it was. Okay.
He's hoping no one's paying attention.
Right. Then February 6th, there was a control release. Okay. February 8th, the evacuation order was lifted after 3 days. And there we go. So on February 16th, Sherrod Brown calls on Governor DeWine to declare a disaster, seek federal government support for derailment in East Palestine. One of the statements that DeWine said was, I don't want to declare a federal disaster. I don't want FEMA to get involved because I want Norfolk Southern to pay for this. Which later on, there's one source in here. It's called the Lever. It is basically, in my opinion, is pretty hardcore union. They basically said that, Norfolk Southern had 2 prior derailments this year within the year that they haven't paid for yet. So, just saying. Let's see here. Okay. So, as we stated in our weekly wake-up call, Donald Trump ordered, or he delivered his good stuff. Okay. He delivered the good stuff. Oh. So, what just happened?
I don't know.
I don't know either. I just lost one of my sources.
Oh, not that.
Anyway, Vanity Fair has an article, and I can put it back in because I put it in here. Trump forgets to mention that the train safety regulations he gutted during his visit to East Palestine. Now, as we said in the weekly wake-up call, Trump is a grifter, and he's a liar. And it's not comical, but you can't help but laugh at how ridiculous he is. So basically, what he said.
I can't laugh at how ridiculous people are that still believe him.
I know. He brought pallets of this water that he uses for his hotels and stuff, which is called Trump natural spring water.
He gets out of his toilet.
He gets wherever. Nobody knows where it's coming from. It's perfect grift, as we said. Water isn't really regulated. Who knows? Who knows what he does? I can see him having people, run to the faucets in the hotel rooms and fill in with bottles. I don't know, but he basically mentioned that this was a travesty, that this happened, and was blaming Biden and Buttigieg and saying that Biden was in the Ukraine when he should be here, and blah 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 blah. A reporter mentioned the fact that Trump had rollbacks on several rail regulations. Trump said, "I don't know, no, I had nothing to do with that." Okay, to which Pete Buttigieg responded, number one, that they're not afraid to own their policies, and number two, that if Trump really had nothing to do with that, then he would have no problem backing restoring regulations. One of the regulations was on braking, these special brakes, which could have potentially prevented this. And we'll get into that in a minute, and to the reasons why I know, Deb knows, and by the end of this, you should know that he absolutely knew what he was doing. Okay, so let's see here. Let me go back, put it back in. Oh, it reappeared. Look at that. Wow. Okay. So, yeah, as said in the Associated Press, I'm declining that. Go away. Yes. So, transport safety rules rolled back under Trump, including the number of people per train based on the number of cars, a whole different number of things having to do with trains carrying chemicals. There's a bunch of details in here, but there are reasons why he did this. A big reason. Now, Norfolk Southern is the one who was responsible for this one, and they're also the second biggest cause or the company that has the second biggest number right now of accidents, derailments, and things of that nature. They've thrown roughly $100 million into politics since 1990. Okay, and they have funded a ton of politicians, Republican politicians in Ohio specifically, including Governor Mike DeWine. So, Norfolk Southern's profits and accidents rates have risen in recent years. When you deregulate and when you don't do certain things and when you're not as safe, you save money, but you also potentially cause more accidents. But don't worry about it, because Norfolk Southern gave some workers paid sick days after the crash.
It's mighty white of them.
Yeah, isn't it? One article, I guess it disappeared. I don't know. It's not big enough to put in here. Norfolk Southern lobbied for these rollbacks that we were talking about, and Trump immediately gave it to him. Now, I don't know if they donated to his campaign or if it was just because either Trump was told or he just saw that they did a lot of donating to Republican candidates. But he's the champion of deregulation, the biggest champion of deregulation since Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
He's known for it. So one thing I wanted to mention, as I did mention this, and this is an article by Matthew Cunningham Cook. Now, as I said, this is a lever, and this is pretty heavy into labor. It's pro-labor. I think they go a little, they push hard, and I understand why they do it. I don't completely agree with everything they say, but I believe that these things actually did happen. So Ohio Governor Mike DeWine has pledged that Norfolk Southern will be held accountable for the February third train derailment disaster in East Palestine, Ohio, to ensure the community is properly protected from the toxic chemicals released into the air and water. They're the ones who created the problem, said DeWine on February 7th, 4 days after the accident. It's their liability. They're the ones that ought to pay for it. DeWine has refused to issue a disaster declaration that would send much-needed federal resources to East Palestine and draw attention to the Norfolk Southern accident. He also failed to ensure that the railroad giant paid the price for 2 other derailments in this state earlier this year. It's February. Okay. Norfolk Southern's safety record is not good. Okay. Transports goods, nearly 20,000 miles of rail in 22 states and Washington, D.C., has reported the second highest accident rate nationally among the 7 major freight railroads each year since 2019, according to the Federal Railroad Administration. Now, this is calculated by accident per million train miles. So it's about 3 accidents per million train miles. Okay. So they log an average of 30 million miles a year during the past 4 years and have reported an average of nearly 261 accidents a year. Okay. This is something. Now, I looked into this because it's off of Substack. These are guys. These are real reporters. Sarah Jones actually has been a contributor to the Huffington Post. She's also, I believe, a co-founder of Politicus USA. Jason Easley is the founder. So this is legitimate. Okay. You see a lot of these web publishers now, but they are legitimate newscasters. Unlike
use Substack as a newsletter.
As a newsletter, yes.
I get it in my email. That's how I gave it to you.
And this is talking. And by the way, I'm continuing reading. Go away. So this is using official reports, official news reports as sources, basically saying that Norfolk Southern is trying to, but they're getting caught, clandestinely spread the toxins from this East Palestine crash, derailment, to different states without letting people know. Which, by the way, no. It's a no. Officials said they were blindsided and weren't informed of the waste transport. So one of these toxic chemicals identified by the EPA which is more than Norfolk Southern had on the list. Sent to Wayne County is vinyl chloride, which is a carcinogen. Okay. So 1.8 million people are being sandbagged. Vinyl chloride is a serious carcinogen and something we should have heard about sooner. The landfill taking the deep well injections is a facility cited many times and shut down in the past. But by the way, again, this is a company who has time and time again donated to Republicans. Now,
by the way, they did donate $10,000 to DeWine's inauguration party.
Okay.
Which is the maximum you can give. So
that's, yeah. I knew that they were a donor to DeWine. I knew that.
And that was separate and apart from what they donated from his campaign.
Okay. Okay. However, what are the Republicans focusing on? Can anyone guess? The House Oversight Committee, GOP, opens a Ohio derailment investigation on why Pete Buttigieg waited so long to go to the site. I mean, now, by the way, remember, and I believe one of these, I believe it was the previous, or might be this next one, Mike DeWine had the balls to say that he wasn't informed about how dangerous it was, which is why he waited 2 weeks. Did you see the timeline and where he told people that it was a matter of life and death a couple of days after the accident? He's full of shit. Okay. But Pete Buttigieg, here's what he basically said, and there is an embedded video. I think it's on this one. Yeah. Okay. So he said, look, I should have spoken out earlier, but I was too busy on I was too busy on the other stuff, which is trying to push for rolling back the rollbacks of the safety regulations, but I should have spoken out publicly sooner, and it was a lesson learned. However, he said in this interview, which is about a 10-minute interview, I urge you guys to do it.
That was a good one.
It's a good one. He basically said, look, there are two reasons why people go on site to these kind of things. Number one, to get your photo op, to run for office, to get your name out there. That's not me. That's not what I want to do. Number two, it's to fulfill your role and your job. Right now, my job is to advocate. The NTSB, which is a separate organization from us, okay, they're independent from the government for good reason, because they don't want to be political, as the chair said. Okay. So their job is to investigate. Our job, and Pete Buttigieg's job, is to take that information, synthesize it, and look at it, research it, and make recommendations to the legislators, who then, in a perfect world, would legislate.
Correct.
Or just take kickbacks from Norfolk Southern and be done with it.
Right. But don't worry, because Mike DeWine got Norfolk Southern CEO's word that he would clean it up.
Right.
Yeah. Good enough for me.
So, again, he did. Mayor Pete did go to the site, but and that interviewer, I understand she's doing her job, but she was pushing him. She's like, "Why aren't you going? You know, people want it." Blah 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 blah. He said, "Look, they're not done with their investigation yet." So there were three different entities. There's the EPA, there's the NTSB, and the DOT. This report brought to you by Popeyes. So the NTSB investigates. The DOT does, there are people who work for, I think it's the rail administration, the Federal Rail Administration, the one that they, which is kind of, it doesn't really have much power, but they do their own investigation and report to the DOT. But the DOT takes information and makes recommendations. The EPA is different because they deal with the stuff that affects the environment. And the reason they were there in that particular case is because of the toxic chemicals.
Right. They were testing the groundwater.
So an unexpected ally to Pete Buttigieg is Brett Baier. Okay, and a lot of people, I've seen this on Twitter, and now I know where it's coming from. Brett Baier is defending Pete Buttigieg because he himself said, look, very rarely does the Department of Transportation head go to a derailment like that, unless there are fatalities, and there were no fatalities in this case.
Right.
All right. And this is his job, and that's not really his job, but he went and he defended him. He also said that, and so he also said that Elaine Chao and Donald Trump didn't go to an Amtrak. Well, he didn't specifically mention it, but he did say that they never went to an accident, including an accident, a derailment that Deb mentioned. And again, it was another source that was here, but then went poofy. Yeah, I know. I'll add it on. But there was an accident, I believe it was in 2017, and there were 3 people that died. It was a passenger train derailment. Elaine Chao didn't make it, and Donald Trump didn't make it.
Cost $40 million in damages.
Yep. And 3 deaths.
3 deaths.
Now, we're not saying they should go, they shouldn't go. Just be consistent. Be consistent with your criticism. Okay? If you want these guys to go.
We're not saying they should go, they shouldn't go. But please, don't point the finger at everybody else when you're not doing it yourself. So,
Right. Don't point the finger at the people who didn't give the aid when the governor didn't ask for it.
Right.
A governor who, by the way, has been given donations from the very people that caused the accident in the first place. So I just wanted to mention, as I said, there were 3 entities that were investigating this. And now the Republicans want to do an investigation of the DOT. They're trying to completely neuter the EPA, and they have been critical of the NTSB because they didn't do enough. All right.
What the hell have they been doing? Nothing. They just, that's all they do. Finger point and waste people's time.
Yep. So I have a few articles here, and some of this has to do with other issues, but I have a point. GOP lauds a ruling to EPA, but when the EPA needs to do something, Why didn't they do it? Why didn't they do it fast enough? Okay. Now we have the Trump administration rolling back more than 100 environmental rules. So we had 28 air pollution, 8 water pollution, and 9 toxic substances and safety. I mentioned those because they were, pretty much directly involved in the thing we've been talking about. Just, to throw it out there because it's also safety. One of Deb's favorite topics, the coronavirus timeline. Okay. And what Trump did with the coronavirus. Whatever y'all think, he didn't handle it properly.
Nope.
He didn't. And here's a timeline of what he did. He downplayed it, blah, blah, blah.
Remember the whole, pretty soon it's going to just magically disappear.
Right.
Yeah. What a fucking. It is estimated, by the way, that he and Jared Kushner's handling of the pandemic resulted in 300,000 deaths that were unnecessary. Just so you know, there are actually people calling for them to be held criminally responsible.
Trump champions gun rights in NRA speech days after the Uvalde shooting. I don't know. That was bad timing. But here we go. This is kind of out of order, but so Senator Cruz releases a statement in response to the NTSB's preliminary report. He's basically saying that, it's Pete's fault and that he's just trying to shift blame, which I think is hilarious because that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
He's desperate to salvage his credibility. What did Pete do? He didn't do a damn thing other than his job.
Well, that's the problem.
Right.
They can't they don't even, you know what? To me, it's shocking that these people are in office and they don't even understand that the NTSB isn't part of the Department of Transportation. They clearly think it is. It's evident the way the letter was written.
So there was a lot. All I did was hit NTSB overreach. Okay. So Ted Cruz had a lot to say about a speed limiter technology for electric cars. And he was claiming it was overreach. There's other stuff about, the airline industry. Okay, every time they try to come up with some kind of regulation, it's overreach, it's overreach, it's overreach. With the rail companies, Trump undid a lot of the proposed rail changes and regulations. And what's happening? So here's the final thing. When the unions speak, I listen. There are certain things that I take with a grain of salt. When they talk about, when they defend their guys, from what they did or whatever, I kind of take it with a grain of salt because I know they have to defend them. I get that. But when they talk about safety, that's a whole nother thing. Because the union's sole purpose is to protect their working brothers and sisters. Okay, safety is one of the huge pieces of this. And they know, we know, Deb knows, you all should know that businesses try to cut corners to save money and save their money. Not your money, but their money.
Right.
So I'm going to read this whole thing. because this is the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. This is basically the machinist part of it. East Palestine derailment and overall rail industry safety. So somehow we tried to warn you, just doesn't quite cut it. For the past several years, rail labor unions, ourselves included, have been ringing the alarm bells about the dangers of cost-cutting business models, the so-called precision scheduled railroading, or PSR for short. And we've talked about it before, actually. And, we kind of just did a short description of it. We've testified before Congress and the Surface Transportation Board. We've filed comment after comment, pleaded face-to-face with safety regulators to do something, anything to ensure this death by 1,000 cuts business model doesn't result in another catastrophic disaster like the one that just occurred in East Palestine, Ohio. Palestine, Ohio, sorry. That's why we applaud U.S. Transportation Secretary Buttigieg's announcement to take immediate action to repair our broken, frail freight rail system. Secretary Buttigieg's announcement is a major step in the right direction. We're particularly pleased with the Department of Transportation's encouragement of the industry to small inspection technologies without foregoing human inspections. This mirrors the repeated calls our union has made for many years. And by the way, these inspections call for more people on the rails, more people on the grounds, more people in the cars. So not only, I understand it means more manpower. I get that. And that's good for the unions, but it's also good for safety. While our union welcomes the announcement, there's still much more to do if we are to roll back years of destructive and unsafe business practices that have plagued our once prized freight rail network. PSRs is designed to avoid inspections, and this is part of the whole. This is part of the whole reason of the potential rail strike. This is when we did a show on the rail strike. The PSR model is exploiting loopholes for federal inspection requirements. Federal regulations require inspections by a qualified mechanical inspector, aka Carmen, I don't know, also known as a Carmen, I guess, at each location where train cars are added to a train. So again, more people that have to be hired. This requirement is also often ignored or substituted by allowing operating crews, not qualified mechanical inspectors, Carmens, to perform pre-departure inspections and or brake tests. Railroads are also relying increasingly on automated wayside detectors to replace rather than complement human inspections. The railroads have sought waiver after waiver to allow in-person inspections to be substituted for automated temperature detectors that simply indicate if an assembly is hot or cold. The regulations requiring rail cars to be inspected by qualified carmen don't exist to cover the railroad and red tape. They exist because it's inherently dangerous to allow uninspected rail cars to traverse our nation's rail network. They exist to ensure those inspections are being carried out by our experts, called Carmen. These Carmen have spent on average 2 years qualifying as journeymen. So these are trained people. By learning how to properly inspect and maintain rail cars and all of their associated safety complements. These cars have 90 plus inspection points per car per side, including the wheel bearings like those that failed, causing the derailment in East Palestine. And while we may never know for certain whether a Carmen would have identified the car in a mechanical inspection, we do know that Carmen are the only craft that would likely identify a blown leaking seal on the wheel bearing. because that's their job. That's what they were trained to do.
Right.
To be clear, nothing should substitute the physical inspection of a qualified mechanical inspector. We remain very supportive of the efforts made by Secretary Buttigieg, the FRA Administrator Bowes. Unfortunately, we've had little help from the FRA's Office of Rail Safety, an office that has never seen a safety waiver they didn't like. And thanks to years of rubber stamping, expanding and extending safety waivers by the FRA's Office of Rail Safety, it's safe to say there exist hundreds, if not thousands, of rail cars traversing our rail networks with FRA safety defects. Now, we mentioned three accidents per million miles or whatever. That's still too many. It's hundreds of accidents a year. Okay, not every, and they're derailments. It's rare to have fatalities like that on that Amtrak train, which, by the way, Elaine Chao and again Donald Trump never looked at, but it's still dangerous. You could have injuries, and you could have workmen injured, people inspecting, rail cars, blah blah blah. No time for inspections. Another peril of PSR is the dramatic reduction in time that carmen are allowed to perform inspections and maintenance, even if they're even at the property. The industry standard used to provide for 3 to 4 minutes per car. Today, our carmen are forced to conduct these inspections in 60 seconds or less, which is physically impossible. That's how the railroads want it. They don't want our shop crafts inspecting things because inspections find defects, and defects means a train might be delayed while it's being fixed, which cuts into their bottom line. This is basically for them just, it's just going through the motions, basically, for them. So the PSR model relies on speed at all costs, but the necessary maintenance of rolling stock and infrastructure is impossible due to the significant elimination of the reduction of workforce. Moreover, our infrastructure was not designed to support the train lengths we're commonly seeing today. Because the many trains are under PSR are too long to fit into the yard, they're allowed to remain staged on the main line where they block crossings for first responders and motorists while endangering communities across the country. We have much to do to return our nation's freight rail network to greatness, but first and foremost, our regulators should begin by listening to frontline employees and perhaps take a more skeptical view of rail industry lobbyists and proposals every time they submit an excuse not to comply with safety regulators. The big freight railroads have cut 30% of their workforce in the last 8 years. There's not been any great technological advancement during this time, which would mean, less people, could mean less people. Just a gradual move to forcing more work onto fewer people, avoiding safety measures and infrastructure investments, and providing worse service for customers. All to send $200 billion in stock buybacks and dividends to Wall Street over the past decade. Again, we are grateful that Secretary Buttigieg has announced so many measures to begin holding the railroads accountable for their actions, and will continue to work the appropriate government agencies to ensure that a full and proper investigation can be completed in East Palestine. However, without any significant intervention to slow the PSR model, there is no question that these unfortunate incidents will continue. East Palestine is the most recent proof that America's railroad infrastructure is simply not designed to support the current system. And that was Artie Maratia as a national president of the Transportation Communications Union. Don Grissom is TCU Vice President, General President of the Brotherhood of Railway Carmen Division. So the bottom line is that people don't pay attention to regulations, or what regulations can do, until there's an accident, until there's mail all over the road because we didn't strap the mail properly. People aren't going to know why that's important. Until something like this happens, people aren't going to know. And by the way, I didn't really mention this at the beginning of the show when I was talking about Pete Buttigieg. People were with the NTSB, or the the NTSB and EPA were there within hours to investigate and respond to the crash. People are saying that Pete Buttigieg and or Joe Biden should have been there before Donald Trump. Donald Trump, I don't know if he was in the way or not, but
Donald Trump shouldn't have even been there. Okay,
he shouldn't have been there.
He had nothing to do with any of this bullshit. Let's call this for what it was.
It was a photo op.
Grandstanding, selling his brand. He's a political candidate. He wasn't there because he cared about anybody. That's just blatant hogwash. Okay?
At best, he was just a simple distraction, just trying to grab some limelight for himself. Okay. At worst, he was a grifter who potentially may even have possibly hurt people with water that was improperly stored. Number one, possibly. I'm not saying he did, but it could have happened. And on top of that, he could have been in the way of an investigation with news crews and whatever the hell else.
He served absolutely no purpose there.
No.
The only purpose he served was to ingratiate himself with the voting public. Let's get real, okay? He's not a member of the government. He's the former president. He fucking lost, okay? So enough with the Trumpenstein stuff.
Well, we have to deal with it because he's there.
I'm just saying.
And by the way, Joe Biden, he doesn't need to be there either.
Right.
Okay. They're making their recommendations. So
Judge is his secretary, the Department of Transportation guy. He's going to be talking to him. He's not going to go there because he doesn't know what the best course of action is. All right. If what you feel comfortable with is having somebody there for a photo op, well, I'm sorry, but again,
that's not doing your job.
That's more of looking at politicians on the surface and, again, needing to feel comfy. I don't know what it is, but he's got nothing to contribute to the process.
As I said,
on what he gets for recommendations.
Pete Buttigieg said that he would be there when he felt it was time for him to do that in order to do his job.
Right.
Okay. And to make his recommendations. So, and he did it. So, and what people want and what people need could be two completely different things. It was in Pete Buttigieg's best not interest, but his, in his mind, the best thing for him to do would be to continue to push for bringing these safety regulations back. That brake system was supposed to be put in by 2023 this year, okay? And Norfolk Southern pushed hard to make sure that they didn't have to do it because that would mean money. They're cutting back on safety regulations, which puts not only their workers at risk, but also puts the public at risk. Okay, regulation is used to protect the public. I know people don't like to hear that. I know people like to do what they want to do and this whole idea of freedom, but
first of all, rolling back regulations doesn't do a thing to benefit the public.
No, it doesn't.
What it does is it benefits corporations. So let's understand.
Money. It saves them money.
So,
It saves them money. And by the way, what happens when you have to be displaced from your home, when you have to move temporarily? That puts you at financial risk. Okay. One thing I didn't mention, Norfolk Southern offered $1,000 per resident of East Palestine, and lawyers recommended that they don't take it. When companies offer money like that, you know they're trying to cover their ass. So they know they're wrong. Okay. This isn't going to go away. I don't know if there's going to be, I don't know if there's going to be criminal, but I can see, and by the way, because we went through this with the Aaron Brockovich thing and Hinckley and all of that. These guys are not looking for a big payday. They're looking to survive. Okay, they didn't ask for this. They didn't ask to be displaced from their homes. Okay, and we don't know yet. Okay, there has been exhaustive tests of the air, the water, well, mostly the groundwater, the ground, to see if anything has been adversely affected. So far, there's nothing, but there could be long-term effects. We don't know.
right.
Okay.
Yep.
It's more complicated than you might think. What I can say is that for a long time, the rail industry has been working with the Republicans to deregulate. This is the kind of stuff that the progressives have railed against. Oh, money in politics, blah, blah, blah. Well, here it is.
Right.
Because it's a Republican, or because it's Republicans, you don't trust it because the Democrats are railing against it. Stop. Anyway.
That's what we got.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next week.
And I got the good stuff.
See ya. Is it Trump water?
No.
Is it toilet water?
It's Buttigieg water.
Yeah. All right, gang, we'll see you next week. Did you just spit that out? I'll talk to you later. Talk to you all later.